warning, this review might suffer from the fact that I really liked this book. And when I really like a book, it's so much harder to review. For some reason, it's so much harder to talk about positive things than it is to talk about negative things. But I'm gonna do my best. Hi everyone, Rosie here. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review, discussion, thoughts, I never know what to call these videos, on the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood. If you would like to know why I chose this book out of a number of others, make sure you check out my Quick to Judge challenge up here when I chose to read it. But for now, I think I have a fair number of things to say about this book, so let's just dive right on in. In case you don't know, the Penelopiad is the story of the Odyssey told from the point of view of Penelope, who's Odysseus's wife. So while Odysseus goes off and fights in the Trojan War, and then he has his big Odyssey to come home, takes him like 10 years, he's gone for like 20 years or something. While all of this is happening, his wife, Penelope, is sitting at home in Ithaca trying to get on with her life. Or not trying to get on with her life, but trying to hold their life together. She's got her young son that she's raising, she has to manage, all of their stuff for the first time. And then once the Trojan War is over and it takes a long time and Odysseus isn't coming home, a whole bunch of suitors show up and try to marry Penelope because basically by marrying her, they take control of Odysseus's kingdom. This book covers that period of her life, but doesn't only focus on that. We follow her from, I think, basically her birth all the way through her life. So we really get to know her as a person and her experiences and how she ended up the person that she is, who's briefly mentioned in the Odyssey but doesn't really play a major role, and sort of what her side of that story is. Which brings me to my first major point of interest in this book, which is the perspective and the style of storytelling that is used. As I've just said, it's from Penelope's perspective, but it's also told in the first person, and really it goes a step beyond just being a first-person narrative, because she's not telling us what's happening as it's happening. She's telling us her life story from the afterlife. So we're really seeing her experiences in reflection, in thinking back over what happened to her and reflecting on everything and what her take is. I think it's sort of implied that she's speaking in the afterlife in the present day, so it's like, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 years after she's died, and she's had all of this time to dwell and to think and to consider and to formulate her thoughts and opinions and her judgments of everything that happened to her. And I think that just makes for an incredibly interesting perspective on a story. I'm not always totally sure about first-person narratives. Sometimes they don't really work for me, but in this case, because it's got the addition of that reflection, it was perfect. And the passage of time element also gives it a really engaging tone. Atwood somehow really manages to balance being very deeply rooted in the past, in the time period where this was set, in the possible voice of someone who lived in that time, while also keeping it really kind of snappy and fresh and modern. And those things shouldn't really work together, but in this case they do so perfectly. Then, in addition to Penelope's story, sort of interspersed between her chapters, we also hear from the chorus, which is the group of 12 maids who were killed by Odysseus in the original story of the Odyssey when he returns to Ithaca and finds that they've been fraternizing with the suitors who've been harassing his wife. Of course, this is totally unfair, and that's one of the themes that's explored in this book, but they provide these interludes in a variety of styles and perspectives that really round out the book as a whole. In some places, they're used to sort of enhance Penelope's story. For example, when Penelope discusses the struggles that she faces as a princess and the lack of control that she had over her life, they chime in to remind us that it was worse, not better, for lower class girls. And although they may have had certain freedoms that she didn't have, that really they also had no control over their bodies or no agency in their lives either, and they're all in this terrible situation sort of together, but also completely separately. But then in other interludes, they really remind us that this is Penelope telling her story. I wouldn't say that they go so far as to imply that she's an unreliable narrator, but there are definitely points where they remind you to think about the fact that Penelope is telling from her perspective, and that there might be other perspectives, or that maybe she isn't being totally honest. Like I said, I don't think that's the final implication, but there are certainly sections that I think are intended to make you think and make you question what another telling of this same story might have been. Penelope and the maids, and to a lesser extent Helen of Troy, bring me to what I think is really the most interesting theme in this book. And that's an entire discussion of control and agency and, tangentially, responsibility. Despite her incredible intelligence and ability, Penelope spends almost all of her life being either directly or indirectly controlled by the people around her as a result of her gender and her position in society. First, she lives at the whim of her father, who decides everything, including who she's going to marry, and then once she's married, at the age of 15, she becomes totally under the control of her husband and his family. And of course, there's all sorts of interesting dynamics there between not only the control that men have over women, but also the control that other women can exert over each other. Even once Odysseus is off at war and then on his great journey home and all of this, and she's doing her best to hold their kingdom together and to make it prosperous in his absence and to raise their son well, everyone around her refuses to acknowledge her authority. Because of that, she really has no power to act. She knows what she should be doing. She knows what she wants to do. She knows what the right thing to do is. But without the power to do that, she's left sort of trying to make the best of a situation where she can exert very little control and trying to manipulate the situation to the best of her advantage, but without the resources that she needs to properly do what she needs to do. And this puts her in a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because in a lot of cases, there's no right decision that's available to her. There is a right decision, but because of the way society treats her and the refusal to acknowledge her, she can't enact that right decision, and so she's left blamed for making the wrong decision. And that's a topic that the character discusses a lot throughout the book, is that there's always someone ready to jump and say, look at her, she did the wrong thing, she didn't do it right. But even when they are praising her, and even when she is lifted up as what a great wife Penelope was, it's never for her intelligence or her ability, really. It's to keep other women subjugated, and this is something that the character obviously is not a fan of. In contrast to Penelope, we have the even more harrowing look into this issue when we see the maids, because they're trying to make the best of their lives, but they have literally no control over their lives. They don't have the right to say no to people. There's some interesting discussions in this book about consent, and these women can't give consent, so how are you holding them accountable as if they did? Because they couldn't say no. So whether they verbally said no or not, it's rape either way. What's going to happen to them is going to happen to them regardless of what they say. So what does it matter what they say? I'm not explaining this well. You should read the book and think about it for yourself, because it's a very, very well put in the book, and I'm not verbalizing it well. I think I'm going to hopefully put this into words a bit better, because the last character I want to talk about with respect to agency and power and responsibility is Helen of Troy. In this book, she's portrayed as the beauty to Penelope's brains, and she knows it. She is, on the whole, not a pleasant character in this book, and not a pleasant person. But I really want to focus in on the discussion about her responsibility for the Trojan War and all of the lives that are lost. Penelope holds Helen responsible because she sees it as Helen ran away with, was it Paris? I should know this, I just read the book, but that side of the story is really not the important side. Anyway, Helen runs away from her husband to Troy, and as a result, her husband goes to war, gathers up all of the other kings of Greece, la 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 la, Trojan War, many men die, it's a big thing. Penelope holds Helen responsible for those deaths, that in leaving her husband, she instigated this. And Helen herself takes responsibility. She sees it as sort of like a form of flattery, that so many men died because of her beauty, and that this is, yeah, flattering and not at all a burden on her conscience. But it really got me thinking, is she responsible? She was married as a teenager to a husband that she didn't choose. She had no control over who she was sent to spend her life with. And whether she left her husband for the right reason or not, she chose to leave her husband. She did not choose her husband's reactions, and I don't think she's responsible for her husband's reactions. Maybe I'm thinking about this too much from a modern perspective, but I think that's kind of the point of this book a little, is to think about some of these things from a slightly different perspective. And I think that regardless of whether she chose to leave for deep and meaningful and good reasons, or because she was shallow and vain and petty, either way, she was responsible for leaving, and whether or not she suspected what her husband might do, she's not responsible for what he then chose to do. Ultimately, it was her husband who decided to pursue the matter, and her husband who decided to go to war, and her husband who made all of these choices. So, to me, especially where she didn't even choose to marry him in the first place, how can she be responsible for that? That being said, when she's being portrayed as a vain and cruel person, and she is the obvious cause of a lot of suffering in Penelope's life, I can see why Penelope would blame her. I don't think that the character of Penelope is wrong to do so. I just think it's an interesting question to think about in general. All in all, this book was powerful, and it was moving, and it was beautiful, and it was exactly as heartbreaking as I thought it was going to be. But there is a lot of gorgeous writing and beautiful imagery and incredibly thought-provoking concepts and a lot of surprisingly snappy humor. So if this is a story that you are at all interested in, please, please, please pick it up. Please check it out. It's very short, so it's very readable, and I'm a fan of Atwood now. I need to read more of her books. I don't know what I'm going to read next, but this has me convinced that I definitely need to read more. Let me know down below, have you guys read the Penelopiad? If you did you like it? Do you agree with me? Whether or not you've read it, what do you think of some of the ideas that it brought up to me? I'd love to know. And as always, if you liked this video, please give it a like down below. If you would like to see more of my videos, please hit subscribe, and thank you for watching.